Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
No, don't! Look. It's incredible. Open the door! I can't. We have to hold it.
It's weird. Before you came on, I wanted to make sure we weren't covering same ground of stuff we'd done before, because I had in my head you'd been on a lot more episodes than you had. And I think the reason for that is because I knew you had your Aliens Omnibus. And so I was like, okay, one of these days I'm going to get back to him for when I needed to plug in one of those stories from the omnibuses. And to some degree, you pulled back from podcasting, I think probably because you want to actually spend time with your child and not waste your life like the rest of us. But also, I just didn't want to bug you. You know, you had stuff going on. Often I would be up against deadlines. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to knock out this miniseries. Nobody cares about this one anyway. And so I never had a book to really go back to and talk to you about. And I think we ended up blowing through all your omnibus stuff. So you were always like a guy I was going to contact to record with, and it just never ended up happening. And then by the time I'm at a point where it's like, Ryan, where are you? It's like I'm probably outside of your scope essentially when it comes to the alien stuff. And of course you had a great presence in the episodes you were on, but I think you were only in 3 of the episodes. It was Genesis, Tribes, and then you had your CCG story that would end up in one of the omnibuses. So there's actually a pretty broad expanse that we never discussed. Did you ever go back and check out any of the Aliens versus Predator stuff? Were there any stuff from the omnibuses that we maybe somebody else talked about that you did get a chance to express an opinion on?
I should have. I remember volunteering. I did want to talk about Labyrinth, but you had somebody else for that one. And that was fine because I didn't need to, but I just remember that was a story like growing up that I really enjoyed reading. And I think part of it, a large part of it was the art on Labyrinth that I really liked. But now it's been forever and I haven't really looked back at it, so I don't need to say it. And yeah, it really was lucky that just like enough time had passed that I actually managed to go back and look through all of the old long boxes that are still in my parents' basement that I did pull out like 10 Alien floppies that I got. And these were just the ones that I was getting at the time in the mid-90s. And I was like, hey, and I shot you. I was like, these are the ones that I have. Some of these I've read, some of them I haven't, I don't think. But whatever you need to cover. It was just good that enough time had passed that I actually had the wherewithal to look for some other stuff that wasn't in those books.
So did you ever read any of the Aliens vs. Predator stuff?
Yeah, I don't know if I did read the Aliens vs. Predator comics, no. And here I'm sitting in my stack. I have the 4-issue miniseries Aliens vs. Predator Eternal. But this does not look familiar. I can't say that I ever actually cracked these open. After you read them, if you think you want another view, I mean, I can read this Eternal miniseries and give you any thoughts. I mean,
no, that'd be great. Because that's one of those where it's a big enough breadth where if you want to read it, if you actually want to read it, then go ahead and read it, and I'll try to record with you so I can either put something in front of episode or add in.
Tell me if you think it's worth my time.
There you go. That's a good idea. Let's do that. But if you already got them out of the box, hold on to them.
Yeah.
By the way, do you have an opinion of Aliens vs. Predator? Which one do you side with?
Yeah, and I mean, this goes back to what we were discussing on the old ones with both the video game and the card game. I always just naturally went with the aliens. I think they're just something more primal, more scary about them, and more simplistic. I think maybe it's a little bit of technophobia and like the technology of like the Predator and all of the weapons that it has access to. And just as a gamer, I'm just much more of a button masher, just hack and slash with your claws and your teeth. So that was always my strategy with those games. I don't know. There's something more the alien just on a more existential level because of all of the allegory of pregnancy and rape and just this like dark future of this thing just living out in the void. It's not just the jump scare fear tactics of the alien, but there is just this primal sense of dread that lingers with the aliens. So yeah, that's definitely where I would lean between Aliens and Predator. They're both A-list, were like great science fiction foils, so you can't go wrong. Well, you can go wrong. We've seen people go wrong with them, but
demonstrably.
Yeah, really. But they both have that's not taking a shot at the Predator. That's just a subjective, give me the alien. Yeah.
Right. Excerpt from the April 15th, 1988, cover dated Amazing Heroes number 139. The cover featured article, In Comics, No One Can Hear You Scream, a preview of the new Aliens comic from Dark Horse by Andy Mangels. In discussing how he writes, Mark Verheiden admits, I write out a fairly loose plot first. It's kind of a free-form method. I find that the best ideas usually come from sitting down and putting putting scene 1 with scene 2 and scene 3. The details come out when I make the connections between the scenes. I would find it incredibly confining to have a tightly detailed plot, because so many of the ideas, the interesting and bizarre off-the-wall stuff, come from keeping things loose and exploring different routes to use in reaching the next scene. I really try to pull back and not force myself into a direction that might be limiting or hold me back later. I know from working on film that the worst thing you can do is to put down so many parameters that there's no direction a writer can go other than a preset, prefab way. That eliminates all the creative elements that makes things interesting. I've worked with producers who say no, A to B to C to D. Every time they say one of those things and give you a limitation, they're taking away something really interesting. You might have been able to go off in a way that would have excited them, but they're saying, nope, I don't want to be interested. I don't want to be excited. I want you to do what I want you to do. That's extremely limiting. Dark Horse is very good about not beating my brains out and demanding totally detailed outline. Obviously, I had to give them a story outline, but as far as the writing goes, a lot of details will be plugged in as I continue to write the series. Verheiden finds that working with both Dark Horse and 20th Century Fox is easier than one might expect. Fox was impressed by the books Dark Horse was putting out, and I think that's one of the reasons they decided to go with us on the book rather than one of the majors. Other than the restriction about the use of Ripley, the only thing they asked us to do was to come up with something interesting. Mike Richardson, Randy Stradley, and myself got together. We all had some ideas for the story, and we knocked around some very vague and general plot concepts. I wrote the outline from there, I went to Fox, and the next thing I heard was that they loved it. I don't mean to make it sound easy, because that was from July to December of last year, so we had about 6 months of messing around with it. How does Aliens, the comic, fit into the Aliens movie framework? I have no idea. The reason I have no idea is that they don't have a script for Alien 3 yet. William Gibson is rumored to be working on it, and Ridley Scott is supposed to direct it. At the time we started the project, they weren't even sure there was even going to be another one. We decided that our story is our story, and it's independent of anything they do. If they come up with a storyline 2 years from now that completely negates what we've done, that's okay. We're telling a different story. I can't be held back, chomping my fingernails off, wondering if they're going to do a story where Nuke gets killed or Hicks is turned into an alien or something. I can't worry about that stuff. I have to do my story. It's going to be a while before Alien 3 is out anyhow. Verheiden promises that Aliens is going to be a dark book. I lean towards a sort of cynical form of writing, and Aliens is definitely going in that direction. I don't see that the world is getting a whole lot better in the next few centuries. This isn't to say that it's no fun at all, or that everything's horrible, but this vision is not an especially pleasant vision. It's going to be pretty dark. What I'm hoping to get is a general feel of creepiness, and I think Mark A. Nelson's art can carry this off. I'm hoping to give him things to draw that are extremely creepy and extremely disconcerting. Certainly when you start seeing the aliens doing bad things to human beings, it will hopefully get pretty hair-raising and frightening. I don't know of any antecedents in comics that I could compare it to, because I don't read many comics. It will basically be a cross between the high action of the second film and the moodier moments of the first film. Publisher Mike Richardson's attitudes have brought him to presiding over a very well-received and popular comic company that has pleased both fan and the critical community. One of those comics he wanted to do was Aliens. I just thought it would be a hot book, said Richardson from his Portland, Oregon office. When we were talking about doing it, it occurred to me that people said that movie books didn't do well. For the most part, they were never handled well. We approached this as an exciting, fresh story with lots of energy, and we wanted to get an artist whose look was just right. We thought that if that happened, we could get a lot of interest. Aliens has an edge to it that I think will make it a great comic. I had Mark A. Nelson draw up some samples and we sent them in. Whether through coincidence or they liked the drawing, the next we heard them, they said rock and roll. That's how it went. Richardson also concedes that working with Fox is fairly easy, especially when one recalls that all concerned are professionals and are working with a highly lucrative project. They're very nice people. They have some concerns, as it is a valuable property. Their main concern is the property stay valuable. They don't want some flake coming in and messing it up for them. They've been extremely helpful and cooperative. Richardson is very happy with the creative team on the project. Mark Verheiden is one of the best writers in the field right now, as I think anyone who has read his American can attest. He's been getting a lot of offers since he started working for us. He's a special talent. After seeing Mark A. Nelson's Silverwing work and his Godzilla page, I knew he was the right artist for Aliens. He has a flair to his drawing style that's perfect for this book. It's perfect for a black and white book as well. We're excited about him here at Dark Horse. Following in the footsteps of H.R. Geiger, who designed the Alien and the first movie sets, and Walt Simonson, who adapted Alien Heavy Metal, Mark A. Nelson is an artist who's been around for quite a while, yet one who is finally starting to get his due credit. Nelson's list of credits is long and impressive. He's done, in comics, Clone Zone and Starslayer for First, Airboy and Skywolf at Eclipse, Silverwing for Now Comics, and Dinosaur Tales for Just Imagine and Dark Horse. In addition, Nelson has done many comics for Tonka Toys' Rock Lords and Steel Monsters toy lines, quite a bit of work for TSR Games, and just recently illustrated a premium book on King Arthur for World Book Encyclopedias. Nelson teaches art at North Illinois University and works in comics during the rest of his time. The reaction from co-workers to Nelson's Aliens art has been nothing but positive. I think Mark's stuff is fantastic, says Verheiden. It's some of the neatest black and white work I've seen of any artist currently working. His duotone stuff is just fantastic. As far as working with him, we had a chat last year about the design and look of the book, and that's basically been it. I write full script, so I haven't had much interaction with him. I have this opinion that the writer is hired to write the book. I'm not going to pick up an eraser and go at the artist's work, so at the same time, I expect them to work from my my full scripts. That's not to negate collaboration, because that's a wonderful thing when it works, but I like to have the story be mine. I work with Mark like I work in film. That is, I don't give camera angles unless it's essential, so I don't break the page down for my artists either. If I were an artist, I'd find that insulting. Besides, if an artist is good, he should be able to surprise me with how something looks. Chris Warner on The American does that all the time. How did Nelson get involved with Aliens? I guess I have to thank Mike Barron for that, says Nelson. He did a spoof of Godzilla in Clone Zone, which I drew. The Dark Horse people saw that spoof and called me up, asking if I wanted to do a Godzilla pinup page. I think up until that point, most people thought all I did was funny, humorous stuff. So I did that pinup, which became the back cover of their Godzilla special. After that, Dark Horse asked me if I would be interested in doing the Godzilla book, which I was glad to do. Then they got 20th Century Fox interested and called me up again, saying, we've got this Aliens thing, would you do some samples? I did a bunch of samples, they sent them in, and called me back later asking if I wanted to do Aliens. Of course I said yes! Like, what do you mean? Do something this great? Something I'd really love to do? Forget it. I really was enthused about it. That's kind of how I got Aliens in a nutshell, or an eggshell. This is a black and white book, continues Nelson, which I love to work in. I work a lot on a duotone board, which gives me a lot of textures. For me to do Aliens, which is a really contemporary science fiction film noir type story, I can use all that textural emphasis. It's right up my alley. I'm pushing a lot of mood, and Mark is writing a lot of mood. There's some nightmarish stuff in the beginning. Hilary Bard at First Comics nicknamed me E.T. for extra texture, because when I inked him, I'd add in extra layers on top of everything he already had in there. Nelson is working with the Alien photo novel and several poster books from both America and Japan. They help me with the aliens, but in our story, since it's all new settings, I don't have to rely on reference too much. Even with the aliens, if you look at them in the two movies, they change from movie to movie. They're not all the same. People can't say, said in a snotty fanboy voice, you know, you left one thumb off there. Like anything else, all fish don't look alike, even if they're the same species. There are differences among everything in every species, and the aliens are no exception. I'm taking a little leeway, but I am sticking fairly close to the movie designs. I've seen both movies numerous times, so that helps. You were on the show early enough that we never touched upon one of the great controversies. How do you feel about Alien 3?
So I knew that you were going to do that. I have mixed feelings about it. I think there is a really great story buried under there that David Fincher did as a first-time director, tried to salvage and tried to pull out an amazing story out of that. I just think conceptually it was a little bit flawed. I think the decision to make it the next saga, the next chapter in Ripley's saga, at the time the last chapter in Ripley's saga, to kill off the supporting characters that we had fallen in love with Aliens. I think the idea of just marrying the franchise to one character and one actress, I understand the way Hollywood works and the way that decision was made, but creatively I think that was wrong. I think if you had just told the story Alien 3 in isolation about a person, one lone survivor is trapped on this planet that is essentially half monastery, half prison, and you could go either way with that, but have these people who are just this kind of like bizarre religious fanaticism that is tested by this thing that looks like the devil that is picking them off, and just these endless tunnels and the darkness and the shape. Like there's so much cool, scary, and thought-provoking stuff in Alien 3, but the execution, because of all of the script rewrites and all of the interference, it comes off as a mess. If you've ever seen the director's cut, which is a mess in itself because it includes a bunch of extra scenes where Fincher never got a chance to record the ADR. So there are scenes where basically you have dialogue that's just subtitled because you can't hear what the actors are saying. There are a lot of interesting scenes that flesh out some of the stuff and make characters more interesting, that add more depth and everything. And like Alien 3, I wish it wasn't the follow-up to Aliens in Ripley's saga. I wish they hadn't killed off Newt and Hicks off like that. That felt like a middle finger to not just James Cameron's work, but the fans who liked those characters. And it felt cruel. And it just didn't need to be a Ripley story. But if you divorced it from those characters and just take the basic premise and the setup, I think you could have had an amazing Alien movie there.
We ended up covering it two different ways, because there was the Walter Gibson version of the movie, the screenplay that they adapted into comics, where it focused on Hicks and Newt, because that was in the time period where they didn't know if they were going to get Sigourney Weaver back. And that story didn't really work for me. And then you have the actual movie that comes out, and that story doesn't work for most other people. What's weird to me is that if you take that movie, and again, a lot of that development was done with the assumption that they were not going to get Sigourney Weaver back. I have no idea of what they could be thinking crafting Alien 3 in the way that it ultimately was presented to audiences without Ripley. If you do not have Ripley as your POV character, that movie doesn't work at all. There's just, because none of those characters are you're never ingratiated to those characters. You don't care about them. They're fairly despicable people, and they're intentionally off-putting, distancing people. So without you having having that previous relationship with Ripley, it just completely falls apart. So I have no idea what that movie would have been if that character were not in it. And of course, I'm a defender of the movie because I do think that the natural trajectory for a Daly story is tragedy, that you can only go so long surviving the aliens before they're inevitably going to get you. And certainly by the third round, your chances are pretty much nil. I love the movie because I really feel like it is about trauma, and it's about the 5 stages of acceptance of death, not only of her family, but ultimately of herself. So I'm a big fan of the movie, specifically the assembly cut you mentioned, which is a much better movie. But as I've talked about that at length, so I don't want to go too much into that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're almost to Resurrection.
Joss Whedon's Alien Resurrection. At the time, I really, really liked it. And I think it was just because, I want to say it felt more like a PG-13. And maybe it's because of Whedon's dialogue and he had that capacity. But there was this kind of veneer of cool, even though the director, being this French director, had like this really kind of stylized thing. You had like these roguish kind of pirate troop, like kind of like bouncing around in this military thing, kind of like, and like they didn't belong. So like, I don't know, like there was just like this weird kind of quirky like outsider group in this like hostile military structure that was taken over by the aliens. Lots of weird ideas, lots of over the top performances. Brad Dourif as the scientist and everything like that. I loved the action sequence when they're trying to climb the elevator shaft. What's his name has to like hang upside down. Ron Perlman like locks his knees into the ladder or whatever and hangs upside down, shooting down at the alien.
It has a really hyperbolic take on the action sequences that's unique to that movie.
Yeah. It does feel more actiony, less scary and suspense. I remember a lot of it, and yet it doesn't feel like it's very memorable. I don't know what it is.
I think it's a movie that you remember more for imagery than you do for story. Like there's some really interesting shots in there, and getting to see the aliens swim is a really interesting thing that they don't really do anywhere else. And so there's moments like that you very much remember, but to some degree it doesn't feel like it's it fits in the alien universe that has been established in the other 3 movies. It's just too over the top and fantastic, and it doesn't really, I think it goes a little too far out on a limb to be its own thing and not be a part of that established grounded universe through the first 3 movies.
Right.
And also a lot of people, their interest in aliens as a property took a major hit from Alien 3. How did you see that one, by the way?
Would have been VHS after it came to VHS.
Okay.
I remember like when it was in theaters was right around the time that I was probably getting into Aliens and a lot of like the lore and seeing like that on videotape, but I didn't see Alien 3 in the theater. It wasn't until it came out on video.
How long did you carry on getting comic books? Like, I know you got the Omnibus, but the Omnibus would have been quite a few years later. You were collecting stories here and there. If you made it to Aliens vs. Predator Eternal, I guess that's late 90s by that point. So you kind of stuck around dipping in when something appealed to you.
I was reading comics pretty regularly until like 98-ish, and then I stopped for 2 or 3 years, but then got back into them in college or in the early 2000s. I think I picked up the Omnibuses like 2006 or 7.
And you stopped around 3, right?
Yeah. The Omnibus, the Dark Horse versions, I had the first 2.
Mm-hmm. And did you pick up any of the post-2000s stuff as floppies?
No.
A Decade of Dark Horse was a 4-issue miniseries released from July through October 1996, obviously in celebration of the company's first 10 years in business. It makes my bones ache to think about how close we are now to the 4th decade of Dark Horse, especially since I bought this book new. I was never a big Dark Horse reader, but the first issue featured a new Sin City story under a Frank Miller cover at a time when I was buying all of that feature as serialized monthly. The cover was a wraparound, with pictures of Hellboy and Concrete, as well as Miller's own Rusty and Martha Washington, both typically drawn by other artists. Daddy's Little Girl was another case of diminishing returns, so it probably contributed to my weaning off Sin City. This anthology distinguished itself from Dark Horse Presents through better paper, being in color, and offering higher profile properties and talent, some of which has been featured on this podcast before. 1718 by Henry Gilroy and Igor Kordy, and A Brief History of Dark Horse Comics, as remembered by Randy Stradley, were covered in the first Predator Omnibus episode. A Matt Wagner Grindle story and a gallery of the 80s bound-in Dark Horse trading cards were also featured in that first issue. The second issue had a Han and Chewie cover, introducing their Star Wars short story, followed by the company-generated heroine Ghost and Ron Randall's Trekker. The fourth issue had a Paul Chadwick cover and story starring Concrete, plus Chris Warner's Black Cross, Masamune Shiro's Exxon Depot, and a Godzilla tale. Our concern, though, is the third issue, released on September 25th, 1996. This one featured Baron Rude's Nexus, Junji Manabe's Outlanders, Arcudian Monkey's The Mask, all under a wraparound cover for Aliens. The publisher summary reads,
Mark Verheiden and Mark A. Nelson's Aliens is a landmark in comics history. That project redefined the entire concept of licensed comics and terrified an entire generation of comics readers in the process. Now they're back with an all-new Aliens tale for Dark Horse's 10th anniversary celebration.
The thing is, Racine had it in for me from the start. My last evaluation was a disaster. He said I was unethical, weak, morally suspect. He was always so damn clinical. In fact, Racine would have had my ass up on charges just for being in this restricted area if he hadn't been taken by those damn things. Funny, in a lot of ways, these last few days would have been rather peaceful, except I didn't have any food, my water supply was dwindling, and I wasn't alone. 5 days earlier, we tagged the derelict in a free orbit and tugged it aboard. Whole thing was totally routine. I mean, we're a salvage station. If we don't salvage, we don't eat. But something was wrong. I mean, I know the regulations. That derelict should have been subjected to a full life form check before he was cracked. Problem is, the scans would have taken 6 hours, and we were in a hurry, as usual. Besides, we did run a visual. Every hatch on the derelict had been blown, exposing its gut to space. Last time I checked, life wasn't supposed to exist in a vacuum. Besides, if I had known something was waiting on that derelict, do you really think I would have been the first one to go aboard? It's a little peculiarity of mine. I'm a complete coward. Someone must have left the comm link open. Another flagrant violation of First Officer Racine's protocol. When the first screams came over my helmet speakers, I knew we had a problem. They warranted aboard the station. I was on the derelict. It's probably what saved me. Some might call that luck. The narrator, Kaneko, exited the derelict ship and saw violence and gore everywhere. Then I saw one of those things. They moved through the station like locusts. Must have been dozens of them. They were inside before the officers could even begin a response. Except for our valiant first officer. Racine always figured if he yelled loud enough, everyone else would fall in line. I thought he was going mad. Kaneko was seized by Racine, who essentially saved his life from the alien. But when the first officer was trying to lay a guilt trip on him, Kaneko snapped and did a Captain Kirk double-fisted slam against his head. Then he made his way into a communications center and sealed the door. He watched as Racine was taken by one of the aliens. The corporation double-holed the communication center to make sure it would survive a cataclysmic event. This qualified. I sealed myself inside without thinking it through. There was only the one hatch, no other exits. Racine was right about one thing. Those things made it to the upper deck within hours. On the view screens were several other survivors calling out for help. It looks like Kaneko essentially gave them the finger. I watched them disappear one by one, begging, pleading, screaming. Then they were gone. I went 2 days without hearing a human voice. I found some water in one of the emergency chests, but no food. I knew the odds. Maybe a distress call got out, maybe not. The creatures didn't strike me as particularly bright, but they were persistent. The communications bulkhead would give, sooner or later. I heard them before I could see them. A troop of armed men in some sort of biosuits do not appear to be colonial marines, but they are handling heavy weaponry. They start blowing away the alien. And of course, they're all visible from the communications center. You guys were good. 2 hours and the entire station was clean. Too bad about Racine. Maybe it was better that way. Funny, while I was alone, I had a chance to think about what happened. I mean, Racine had a family. They would need his line of duty death compensation to make it now that he was gone. When the station is finally cleared out, Kaneko opens up communications center, and of course the men start asking questions, and essentially he trades roles with First Officer Racine. He puts all the blame on him. I only hope the corporation finds it in their heart to pay, even after the truth comes out. It's not going to be easy putting this behind me, but I have to try. Some good had to come out of this, right? Willie Schubert came back to do the lettering on the story, just as he had done for the original miniseries. Major differences again, the color provided by Chris Challinor. This may be the first time that we had Mark Nelson interior pages actually intended for color. So the line work wasn't as dense as you would normally expect. It's a little bit more cartoony, so it takes the color better, but it's still very ornate, really attractive. I especially like the ship. It looks something like a pirate ship. Very, very Tim Truman ship. It looks like Nelson was recalling his days on Star Slayer. There's also some figures in here that recall Tim Truman, which is probably secondhand. It's probably more like Nelson inking Hilary Barda aping Tim Truman or working over his layout. Obviously not as dense of a story as we got from Verheiden in the original miniseries, but how could you? It's a short story. I enjoyed it. It was a good looking book, fun, cynical as intended, and it gave me an opportunity to go back and look at some materials related to the first miniseries. Again, the Amazing Heroes story. Also, if you look in our Tumblr, there'll be some artwork that I pulled from one of the Amazing Heroes swimsuit specials by Nelson. This story was reprinted in the oversized 30th anniversary collection, the one that I got, signed by Schubert, Verheiden, Nelson, Nelson plus a sketch by Nelson. And it also features this story desaturated. They take the color out, and I believe it's the last story in the collection. The story was collected with the rest of the miniseries under the title Decade, a Dark Horse short story collection, released in April 1997 under a Dave Gibbons cover. It was also featured in Aliens Omnibus Volume 5. It was made available digitally, and it turned up in Aliens The Original Years Volume 3 once Marvel had the rights. What led you to pick up Lovesick?
I was pretty much getting everything with Aliens on the cover around that time. I think I had it like in my pull list at one of the comic stores that I was going to. At different comic stores, and I had different lists at different places, and the one of them was Northern Lights Bookstore, and I got more of my Vertigo and like Dark Horse titles there. It just seemed like it was like a college bookstore, and so it felt like less of the superhero genre and more of like what was going on, like the other more adult stuff. So yeah, I'm sure I just said any Aliens books that come out, put in my bag, and I bought this one. So
and this was an odd little thing.
Yeah, having reread it again, interesting.
I needed to research the people who did this because I don't know anything about them. And unfortunately, we didn't have Cisco in this episode to help us pronounce all these French names, so I'm going to do my best.
Thierry Gagnon, Richard Forgues and Randy Stradley, colored by Carrie Porter, and lettered by Clem Robin.
Thierry Gagnon, he was one of the co-writers. He is a Canadian web designer. He's got a LinkedIn page where he's been doing this stuff for decades. He also, at one point in the 90s, did a 31-page bilingual French-English comic called Gerbil Man. It took him 6 years to do that. By the way, I'm pulling this right off Xenopedia. So, any errors that, I'm sorry, I did not multiple source on that one. So the book was co-written and drawn by Richard Forgues, I don't know, also Canadian. Clearly both these guys are French Canadians. If you go on their Twitter accounts, all their tweets are in French. So this guy is a comic book artist and a writer. He was also a layout artist for the cartoons Ewoks, Droids, Care Bears, Sonic the Hedgehog, and a designer and storyboard cleanup artist for Beetlejuice the cartoon. But he also moonlights in comics. He did a couple of short stories for Cheval Noir, which was of course Dark Horse's international black and white anthology. He did a book from Fantagraphics called Liaisons Delicieuses. I don't know. Anyway, I went back and I looked at the Cheval Noir stuff, and it was basically a continuing serial called Adrift, where this woman is in a life buoy and she just keeps finding herself in weird little misadventures. She goes into one cave and she runs into like an action woman with a laser pistol who's fighting a devil, and then she accidentally gets smacked by the devil, and the woman puts her back in her boat and sends her back to be adrift again. And another story, she hooks up like a giant walrus. I don't think they work that great in black and white. They're a little too abstract to be such fairly straightforward sort of adventurous things, even though there's no dialogue. So it seems more artsy than I think the material actually is. And so I guess that because of the connection to Cheval Noir, they invited them to do the one story, the one-off one-shot story. And then they had Randy Stradley, who did the first Aliens vs. Predator miniseries and was an editor at Dark Horse. I think he edited the issue. He ended up doing a second pass over the dialogue, probably just to kind of clean it up some and make it more American, I suppose, or more Western.
Publisher's summary. 11-year-old Jimmy has a crush on his older cousin Nancy, who's a pilot for creepy Dr. Dakian, who also has the hot for Nancy. Unbeknownst to Nancy, Dakian's not just creepy, he's completely mad, and Nancy's rejection has driven him off the deep end. He's killed himself to set in motion a plan to go after Nancy and Jimmy. Between rescuing Jimmy, staving off Dakian's cybernetic doppelganger, and battling the aliens Dakian has unleashed, there may not be enough Nancy to go around.
What did you think about the story when you read it?
Well, I thought the title was misleading. I would have called this Aliens Incel.
Yeah. Well, do we even have that term at the time? It certainly fits today.
True. But the evil doctor's monologue sounds like he's writing the incel playbook. What does he say? You drove me to this, Nancy. Remember that. What happens next is all your fault. It's a weird one in that, looking at the art, and it's funny when you read off his pedigree, this feels very much like it's meant to be kind of a comedic cheesecake story, but the art felt a little bit too childish to be sexy.
Yeah, it was weird because definitely they sexualize the female lead, and I mean, part of the joke is she's got a little boy who is, I believe, her cousin that's desirous of her, and then you've got the guy who is doing a dramatic reading from his Facebook post they find after the act. And then you've got her running around with like prominent nipples, and her short shorts are right up her ass, and so it's supposed to be sexy, but it's weird because you've got that cognitive dissonance where the script is telling you that this woman is being objectified, she's being put into perilous situations, and other people are being put into perilous situations merely in pursuit of her as an object of desire and not seeing her as a human being and not recognizing her agency. But at the same time, and we see her doing all kinds of cool, badass Ripley type stuff, and more than Ripley really. She's like Mila Jovovich in a Resident Evil or something, where she's climbing up into stuff and grappling down, all this kind of nonsense.
Yeah,
but
I mean, she's the head of security of this thing, so she's a competent, like, professional, like, take charge woman.
But she doesn't stop to put her pants on, though. And the male gaze is just all over this thing. And surely this is a guy who's working out all of his, I'm drawing Ewoks and droids all the time. I want to draw a sexy woman. And you definitely get 22 pages of that.
Right. But yeah, the other thing, though, is, like, the alien itself never feels like a threat. Again, like, I don't know if that's supposed to be the manifestation of this incel doctor. His real, like, impotence is the fact that, like, he basically says if he can't have her, he's going to become the alien. He's going to sacrifice himself to the alien so it can kill her and it can destroy her the way he wants to. But she just sees it coming and turns around and shoots it in the head. If that's not a metaphor for his impotent hard-on, then I don't know what is.
Right. Whether it's him directly or by proxy, he's a non-factor.
Right.
This is something I was actually going to try to lean towards at the end of the episode, but I think it kind of fits in this particular story. Do the aliens work as a short story subject? Because I've had a number of conversations with Del Dracula about what is essential to the story for different subjects. And for him, he likes to talk about how it's not an alien story if you don't have the corporation, or it's not an alien story if you don't have the colonial marines. I think that's more of a Derek W.C. angle, where he really wants to see the military aspect in the mix, or it's not what he's looking for in an alien story. There are certain expectations that you have with the aliens. Are you able to satisfy those expectations and tell unique, original, varied stories? Or is the formula so important to aliens that you're going to necessarily have to just go through the same stuff over and over again if you're doing them as a short subject?
I think you run the risk of a lot of repetition. I mean, I think there are ways of doing it, but by their nature, I mean, there are a lot of beats that you have to hit in order for it to feel like an alien story. And I think one of those, I'm not sure like if you've mentioned it with the other guys, but I do think one of the essential beats of the alien story is that they are only part of the evil in the story. The real evil is the corporation, or what mankind is willing to do to itself for the sake of the bottom line. It goes back to Ripley's line in the movie when she says, you don't see them fucking each other for a goddamn percentage. These aliens they're a threat to us because we don't understand them, but we're always going to sacrifice humans to these things because we think we can control these things and we want to weaponize them. It's our desire to play God and control these things, or to make money off of them, that is always going to be it. So at the heart of an alien story, you need not just the aliens to be the foil, not just the aliens to be the monster, but you need a human monster. And in this story, you get it in this creepy doctor. So this one kind of works, but how much can you do that? I mean, I think the next story that we read is very different from this one and does have a little bit of that same element. But can you do that endlessly? Again, I think there's a lot of repetition.
I've talked about this a little bit in other episodes, where when I saw Aliens in 1986, it became my favorite movie in that time period. And then when I saw George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead a few years later, that overcame it and it ultimately became my favorite movie. It's hard, partly it's, the subjectivity. It's like, well, I've got two movies that are favorites and they have elements in common, and I'm going to highlight those elements because I can't help it because I've spent so much time with both of those movies. But one of the things I love about Dawn of the Dead and the zombie genre is that it's, you have zombies, but zombies are just an inciting incident to explore the darkness and humanity and the worst case scenarios, the way that we, especially under times of crisis, the way that we often will buckle and just retreat to our worst instincts and destroy ourselves.
And also capitalism.
And also capitalism. And it's not hard to see that being repeated in Aliens, but one of the things that's kind of funny with the zombies is, you're expecting people to eat each other and stuff, but I think you actually have more flexibility because it's still taking place on Earth. You're still dealing with Earth concerns, where it's almost like even more hyper-specialized when you do an alien story because of that expectation to do essentially a zombie story, but also have it involve aliens and impregnation and eggs and corporations and railguns. And it's like, how far can you get from those elements that people love about Aliens before it is just a zombie story or just a thriller? How far can you put them in the background before there's no point even it being an alien story? It's tricky.
That's a good point.
It's actually like with Predators, and I think they have the benefit because you can move them to different points in time, and because there's a genuine consideration of whether or not the predator or the adversary are going to win. Where with Aliens, the fatalism of the universe is such that you really go into every alien story expecting everybody to die, and you may be happily surprised or confused when they don't all die. Where with a Predator story, you don't really know. It's sort of like a match. Some people win and some people lose, and so it's almost like you have more versatility with Predator stories, especially in the short form, than you do with Aliens. Like, I think you could do, like, I don't know if you could do a TV show about Predators and have that run an entire season without it getting really boring. Whereas Aliens, I think you could do season after season because there's themes that you can explore in that universe where you're touching on all those things people want to have touched upon, and you can actually extrapolate and expand with that extra space. Where I think with the Predators, because it's a matchup, it's sort of like a boxing match or sports where it's enough to just have the confrontation, and you can do that over and over again with different combatants and keep it interesting. And so I think the Predators actually work better as short story subjects than the Aliens are capable of doing, especially on repeat.
I can see that, yeah.
And this was an interesting year because I think the Dark Horse had recognized that they were telling too many of the same stories over and over again, because this was the year where they basically took off. There were only 3 short Alien stories in 1996. It was lucky for the 10th anniversary of Dark Horse, and that was of course done by the original creative team, so they were able to come at that having started this game, trying to find a different take on it, or at least doing something interesting as the OGs of this franchise in comics. And then you had this story, and then you had one of the Herc Mondo stories. So 2 of the 3 stories are comedies drawn in a more animated style, and weirdly cheesecakey too. Like they're both instances where you've got a lot of beautiful women in states of undress and really trying to see the lighter side and the more action-oriented, comedy-oriented side of Aliens. And it's such a weird year and such a weird area to go in. But I think part of it was just driven by, we've done so much of the grim dark stuff, let's just try doing something different and letting this series air out a little bit.
Getting into the actual nuts and bolts of this issue just very quickly, did it confuse you that, like, where the second alien came from? Like, there's, like, this alien queen that comes out of the acid or something?
You see, they make a big deal about the scientist impregnating himself. And yeah, where are these other aliens coming from? Because we see, like, they're supposed to be alone. And we see that he has multiple eggs. But you're right, where are those eggs going? And it's specifically, how do you produce a queen? It's very...
Right, because in the ship, we see the blood coming down on the ring down on the helmet, and in, like, the upper hatch of the ship, there's the chest burster came out of someone. But is that the doctor, or is that somebody else?
I believe that's the doctor, because you see the broken glasses, and he does the weird stuff with the eyes too, which I assume is like, oh, he's wearing the glasses because he's got some weird futuristic condition or something. So I'm pretty confident that the corpse that we see is the doctor. But you're right, where do all these other aliens come from? And despite the fact that aliens do have acid blood, and of course they can survive for at least a limited time in the vacuum of space, but would you really, as the queen, submerge yourself in acid? It just, like, I get where you come at that from a storytelling point, and I think that this is a story that very much tells you don't think too hard about this, because it's ultimately about a girl running around in her panties shooting aliens. But yeah, it also is kind of like, but where and why? You really, any deep thought into this story, and it falls apart really quickly. But I don't think it's supposed to be thought about too deeply. So again, I think it's an instance of podcasteritis.
Yeah, okay, just double checking.
Yeah, but no, I definitely agree. I don't think it's that kind of story. It's not intended to stand up to any kind of scrutiny. I think it's just supposed to be a gas, and you're supposed to be laughing at the little horny kid and the incel doctor.
Can do.
Can do. Or what was the one that he says? Solid or bonus. Bonus.
Yeah.
It's time to do the daily deal. What page do you want from this story?
Oh, if I could have, like, a 1 page of original art. You know what? Part of me, just because of, like, all the weirdness that we've been talking about, part of me, page 4, when they have that big panel of the face hugger with its proboscis standing straight up like it's this erect phallus. that's like, again, with the very suggestion, you French artist, you something. Like...
Lean in, buddy. Lean in.
I think that might be it, just because of that. Like, the alternative is, like, how gory and how gruesome the aftermath of the chest burster is. But, like, the actual pages with the alien, they're not any better than any other aliens I've ever seen. So I think just because of how noticeable that very straight, standing, rock hard proboscis is with the face hugger, I might go with that page 4.
So you mentioned the scene with the aftermath of the burst chest, and it's funny, I think we both went with that as our runner-up. I do think it's grisly in a weird way, and definitely a very foreign way. It doesn't look like the way a domestic artist would have rendered something like that. It's got that just a weird, ornate quality to it, and it's horrific and yet not horrific at the same time. It's just, like, kind of weird. So I liked that, but the one I ended up going with is I thought that the artist did a really nice job with the one splash page of the alien hanging upside down, checking out the female protagonist, and because she's off the distance in her underwear, if I squint, I can pretend it's Ripley in the first movie. So that's the one I went with as my choice. That's page 16.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I see it.
So anything else on this one?
I can't think of... I mean, credit to have, like, this little kid character who's just, like, wants to see his older cousin / babysitter naked. He's not an obnoxious kid. I don't dislike this kid. I'm glad he survives.
I mean, I think he's a creep, but at the same time, I totally can... I would have been the same at that age with that person, so I can't... that's pure hypocrisy on my part.
His sins don't deserve to be torn up by aliens.
True. Yeah, I don't hate him, but he's obnoxious in a way that I'm familiar with and have self-loathing as a result of.
Same, yeah.
So I know you didn't read it, but I do want to talk a little bit about the Headhunter story.
From Xenopedia, publisher's summary. 2 retirement-minded bounty hunters hope to make some quick cash by selling alien skulls in Headhunter, an all-new story by super scribe Mike W. Barr and legendary artist Gene Colan. The issue of Dark Horse Presents also featured an Aliens cover by artist Duncan Fegredo. After their wedding celebration, James and Carla Billings board their new spacecraft and decide to postpone their honeymoon to instead search for alien infestations, hoping to make extra money by collecting and selling more alien skulls to afford the honeymoon of their dream. From the cockpit of their ship, Carla notices newly carved and uncharted tunnels in a nearby asteroid where they land in search of adult bugs. James uses his rifle to defend himself against a creature while Carla locates the nest. While the newlyweds argue over whose bullet killed their most recent alien encounter, James is attacked and killed, leaving Carla unarmed and alone.
It was funny because, again, I went back and I listened to the recordings we did, and it's been a few years now, so some of this stuff I'd forgotten. And I went on a lengthy tear about the history of the Comic Shop newspaper, right? And it was just a weird irony that this is an episode, I want to cover that story on my own, but you're a Gene Colan fan, and so it's like, well, we should talk a little bit about it. I read the story in the issue of Dark Horse Presents, and it's not very good. It's in part because it's very hard to understand. It's hard to follow the flow of it because Colan draws it in pencil. It's not inked. He is of advanced age at this point, and there's some stuff where he just really probably needed an inker, and we probably needed more dialogue to explain what's happening in the story. And there's also this repeating motif where one of the 2 protagonists has been seized by an alien, and that image keeps repeating, and I think the intention is to create tension. But the problem is I don't have any understanding of who these characters are. They don't mean anything to me, so it doesn't matter if they're imperiled if you haven't given me a reason to care, because if I'm reading an alien story, I've seen people imperiled by aliens countless times. I'm pretty desensitized to it. And what was most frustrating to me is I did research. It turns out this short story had a 2-page prelude that was available exclusively in the 500th issue of Comic Shop News. So it's 2 pages of original Gene Colan art that have never been reprinted anywhere. They are not in the Omnibus. They're not in the digital version of the story that was collected a number of short stories. I checked with Odell Abner Dracula, who's got the 3rd volume of Marvel's original years of Dark Horse. They don't find the pages there either. And just trying to find it somewhere as a scan, I was only able to find one of the 2 pages at one of the auction sites, and it shows the couple, and it is cool because it's an African-American couple, and you see them getting married, and then you see that they're going to go on their honeymoon, but they're also trying to secure money for their retirement. It's like I don't know if it's a late life wedding or if we're seeing them early in their lives, and now we're seeing them later after they've been bounty hunters for years. But the whole point of the story is that they actually are like trophy hunters. They go out and they get drone heads and sell them on the market. It's not really necessarily clear that they're the ones who are always going out and actually trying to kill the aliens. I think sometimes they maybe go into the aftermath of conflicts and cut the heads off. And what was weird to me is reading the story, I'm much more interested in the market they're working in. I want to know who's buying these things, what kind of prices, what's the actual process by which they collect these things. And instead it's just a story of they land on a planet, they're supposed to go get some aliens, guy gets caught, he dies, but he manages to kill the alien before it can get to his wife, and she's thankful that he sacrificed himself to save her, even though she's sad that she's just lost the love of her life. But we lost the first few pages where they first get together, so we don't even have that context on a story that's already too opaque. What are you doing? And like, if you spend $150 on one of these omnibuses, and Marvel's done such a good job of getting forwards and afterwards, and they collected materials that was never printed anywhere else in the UK market, to miss 2 Gene Colan pages is just so frustrating to me. Like, how could you? It's only 2 pages. You couldn't find those pages? One was on the market. You could go to the seller and ask them to get a scan for you. If it's an art collector, they could probably have provided that. Why do you guys not have this in a file somewhere? How can you put out the omnibus and not even make an effort to get at least one of the 2 pages that are missing into the story? It's just, what are you doing, guys? You were doing so good for those first 2 volumes that you just dropped the ball so thoroughly on 3. There's an opportunity to get something that nobody's ever collected before, to have something to crow about in this last omnibus, and they dropped the ball. 2 stinking pages. That's all they would have had to have had.
That sucks.
Yep.
I'm sorry. And I'm not familiar with the story. I've never read it, and yeah, I do love me some Gene Colan. I certainly can't defend or justify every story that he's ever worked on. I won't say that his art is always great. Can't say anything about the story that I haven't read, but that does suck that they would have that omission, which just seems like how hard were they trying, or did they care that much? That's pretty weak.
Yeah. That's one of those instances where when I record with the guys, where I'm basically just talking at them because it sounds more natural than me stiltedly trying to read it later on. So I was basically just talking at you, so it's okay.
That's fine.
So we can move on to Pig now.
The Aliens, Pig one-shot was released on April 16, 1997. Publisher summary. Stitch and his band of space pirates have designs on looting the wreckage of a crashed or tug before the rightful owners can arrive to salvage the valuable cargo. The problem, a nest of aliens has set up housekeeping near the wrecked tug. Stitch's solution, a cute little pig carrying a low-yield nuke wired to a remote detonator. Not since Babe has so much rested on the outcome of a porker's performance. How about a little bacon with your alien eggs?
Good story to end on, I think. I think this is probably, if it's not the best story, it's certainly in competition for being the best story. And this is another instance where it's just, I'm getting all the alien stuff and you ended up with the one shot.
Yeah, and I think so. I'm assuming this was just because it had aliens and it was being my folder, but I might have picked this one up off the stands if it wasn't just because the cover, it's not like a Dave Dorman, but it feels very like photorealistic, reminiscent of that style. Just the nature of the title and everything. It's like, wait, is it a crossover between Babe and Aliens? I was like, whatever is this?
The cover is actually a sticking point for me. Like, this was this book that I really just had no interest in reading because that cover looked so much like so many other Aliens covers, and it's just a drone and a pig. And I'm like, why would I want to read that? And I'm just like, in my guts, like, this is not going to be the kind of thing I'm going to want to do anything with. And I'd not researched it at all. I just knew that we were going to have to eventually read it for one of the omnibuses. I put it off to the last minute, and then I cracked the thing open, and it's got Chuck Dixon's story and Flint Henry artwork that looks nothing like that cover. And it's just like a whole other experience than I was expecting. And again, a 180 is like, I go from like, I don't want to read this to like, why haven't I read this?
Right, yeah. I mean, Chuck Dixon's got a serious pedigree. I don't agree with a lot of his politics, but he's written a lot of great comics.
Especially if you're a DC fan. Like, I don't think he did a ton of work for Dark Horse, so this is one of the exceptions, but it's great to have him. I hope at some point we'll get another Chuck Dixon story because he's such a good paramilitary G.I. Joe kind of writer that he seems like such a perfect fit, and he doesn't really do that in this story at all. It's really not that kind of story at all.
No, yeah, it feels like he would be really good for an Aliens or Predator or Terminator type of book.
Like, really, like, Predator very much so, but also like a Colonial Marines. I'd love to see what he would do with something like that.
Yeah, I remember liking this story at the time, and I had a lot of fun rereading this one. This was always one of those kind of like subversive one that creeps up on you, and the story just in general is you've got like this troop of like these 5 kind of mercenary pirates that basically go in and like steal hardware, and they found out that there's one of the company's big ships crash landed on this planet, and the company is going to send a salvage team, but these guys are closer and they can slip into this planet and steal a bunch of this ore and these raw materials that the ship was transporting, and they can make like millions or billions of dollars, whatever.
I think it's something like $70 million or something.
Yeah, and sell this on the black market, split that, 5 ways between them if they can get in there. What's the problem? Oh, the ship crash landed near a bug hive, one of the xenomorph hives. But they've got this idea because for whatever reason they have this pet pig on the ship that I think they were planning on carving up and eating.
Yeah, he was there to butcher. They were fattening him up so they'd have some fresh meat for the return home, I think.
Right. And credit to Flint Henry. Like, I know him by name, but I mean, I was looking at his pedigree, and I don't think I've read a whole lot of stuff that he's worked on. I know of the stuff that he's worked on, but I can't say that I've read much with him. But I think he really does a good job of illustrating these 5 guys and making them all look nasty and distinct, and there's a ton of detail on their ship, making it really lived in. But they come up with this plan. They've got this pet pig that they strap on a vest and just like enough like explosives they call a low-yield nuke, and they're basically just going to kick this pig out, let the aliens capture it, bring it into their hive, and detonate it and blow up the entire hive there. One guy thinks it's a bad idea. He's like, don't sacrifice my pig. I love that thing. But they do it anyway. They kick it out. The pig runs away or whatever. It like runs underground. They try to blow it up, but it doesn't detonate. For some reason, it's out of range or something. They're like, well, it's got a proximity fuse or a timer. It will go off eventually if you're just patient. And the one guy who advocated for the pig's rights, he makes fun of the captain. He's like, you fool, you jackass. This is what you deserve. And he makes enough of a outsider of himself that when he goes to sleep, the captain and the other 3 guys basically gag him, strip him, load him with the explosives, and sacrifice him off. Because they're like, hey, $70 million splits much much better among 4 people than 5. So they kick him out on the planet. He's running. This is where we actually do kind of see the bugs and the aliens hunt him down, and he's running for his life, but they capture him, and he's just like, please detonate the bomb, blow it up. And the captain gleefully is like, yeah, now you son of a... And he sets it off, and the thing blows up and takes out the alien hive. Now the guys can go down, and they've got their powered exosuits, sort of like the E-frames that Ripley used, except these ones are more mechanized with weapons and stuff. They actually look like suits from the cartoon Exo Squad. Yeah. But they go into the thing, and they start to get the ore, and then they actually find some surviving aliens, but they have no problem shooting them all down and get rid of them. And then as they're all getting ready, they hear the sound, and what is the sound? Oh, hey, the pig, it managed to survive that entire time. And it's next to them, and the proximity fuse goes off and blows them all to hell.
So definitely an alien story where everybody dies just like you expected.
Yeah, just like everybody expected. And again, like, the real evil is their greed, their selfish capitalism, their corporate interest, the willingness to sacrifice other humans just for the sake of the almighty dollar. But I think the aliens are in like 4 pages out of this whole thing, so that might be the one problem with this comic. You could replace the aliens with zombies. This could be a zombie story. How much of this is really an alien story? But other than that, I dig this one a lot. This is one of my favorite stories.
Seeing Flint Henry blew me away. I was not expecting that at all. Flint Henry was a discovery of Timothy Truman. He come across this guy while he was working on the Scout book. He recruited him to do a backup strip called Monday the Assassin, I think, or Monday the Eliminator, something like that. And then later on, when John Ostrander was looking for a new artist on Grimjack, he was brought onto the book and just completely revitalized the book. He's the defining artist of the latter portion of that series. And then after Grimjack ended, he goes into the 90s and just doesn't work out for him. He's like, for whatever reason, his career just never happens in the 90s. He did a little bit of stuff for Todd McFarlane because Bo Smith was, I think, a marketing director or something for him and would bring his buddies in to do odd projects. And so I saw him work there. He did some Marvel work, but he just never seemed to light up in the 90s. And then he just completely disappears. And he's so obscure of an artist these days that whereas I can quote Xenopedia constantly on these podcasts, and they're usually very accurate, and they're often, like, I'll have people who credit me with coming up with stuff like, dude, I just took that from the Xenopedia. They have completely misidentified the artist of this story. And I've seen it happen before. They think that he's Henry Flint, who was an artist on 2000 AD, and he also did some work, the Majors in the 90s. I think he did some stuff for the Ultraverse, like the Rune Silver Surfer crossover and things like that. And I'm not a fan of Henry Flint. I think he did an Omega Men miniseries and some other stuff. I don't like his stuff. And so it always frustrates me because even I was confused when he started popping up doing stuff, and I'm looking for the guy I like, and it's this other guy whose style doesn't do anything for me. And so, yeah, even Xenopedia has forgotten poor Flint Henry, and there's not a lot of information about this guy out there. He is incredible. The amount of detail he puts into his artwork is fantastic. He is so good at drawing disoriented, gross, weird people and machinery and just so much intricate detailing. One thing I don't like to do is I don't want to attack an artist, but the inking really fails him here. And the inker is Andrew Pepoy, who I actually met this year. He did a commission for me of Brad Majors from Rocky Horror Picture Show in the style of an Archie character. It's an excellent commission. He's a great guy. I don't want to shit on him, but I just don't think he's a good fit for Flint Henry because I don't think he can quite get in the level of detailing and the approach to his artwork that's needed. So I think that some of where the art misses for me is the inking's not quite where I would want it to be, but it doesn't matter because I think there's so much of Flint Henry on the page. There's so much detail. We're going to talk about what page of artwork you'd want to have. There's not a bad page in this story. You can take any one of these pages and that's for the wall, man. It's incredible artwork.
Right. Yeah. I couldn't think of the title, but Grimjack was the one that I think I'd heard of him associated with, but Grimjack is a blind spot for me.
Yeah. That's one of those things. It's one of those, there's a lot of those books that were around that were like, when you've been around 80 some odd issues, people are aware that you exist, but that doesn't mean they've actually explored any of that stuff and are familiar with it. And the fact is, because the first line was winding down in the early 90s and you were kind of getting into comics more in the early 90s, they were like on the way out as you were coming in for the most part.
Yeah. Even if you don't know any of these characters' names, and they all get names, but like you don't need to, because their faces have so much personality.
Yeah, you can tell everybody apart in this. You know who everybody is, which is perfect for, again, we were talking about how cool it is when you've got like a Predator lineup where it's all these bodybuilders and all these cool, cartoonishly overdrawn people, characters, whatever you want to call it. And he would have been perfect for something like that. And he'd already worked with Chuck Dixon on a epic heavy hitters miniseries called Law Dog. I don't know if it was intended to be an ongoing and got truncated or if it was always a miniseries, but that was another fun book that the pair of them did. And I guess that's part of the reason why they ended up carrying on and doing this project as a one-off. But yeah, all these characters are really cool. And it would have been really interesting to see them do something a little longer form and take advantage of his ability to convey so many different characteristics of so many different types of people who are kind of, I mean, they're all a bunch of pirates. You know, most of them are jerks.
Yeah.
Nobody really stands out in terms of their personality all that much, except you have the one guy who's pro-pig and then everybody else is anti-pig. But on the page, they are completely different from each other. You can absolutely tell them apart. And there's so much detailing in the faces and the scars, in the machinery. He really goes crazy with that stuff.
I am really surprised that he didn't do some Star Wars work for Dark Horse in the 90s, because given like his detail, but also like some of the levels of machinery with the complexity of the ships, and just because in this era, like some of the stuff that Star Wars or that Dark Horse was publishing with Star Wars was like their Tales of the Jedi books and their Dark Lords of the Sith. These were stories that were set thousands of years before the movies. Kyle Benning and I have talked about those on my podcast. We kind of liken them to Star Wars set in the Hyborian age of Conan the Barbarian. It's a little bit more primitive Star Wars while still having ships that can go to light speed and stuff like that. The kind of ships and the kind of technology that he's drawing in this, it doesn't quite look like the George Lucas style of technology from the movies, but maybe a little bit like adjacent to that, and you could have expected that in one of those Star Wars comics.
Well, and especially because John Ostrander tends to keep it in the family. He had done all those years with
John Ostrander started doing Star Wars right around this time.
And so John Ostrander spent all those years working with Tom Mandrake on Grimjack and then on Firestorm and other works, and then he goes on to work with his wife Jan Dursamo on all that Star Wars stuff. And then I guess
that actually, I don't think he took over Star Wars until the early 2000s.
Yeah, so it might have been a situation where Flint Henry might have just been out of comics by that point, because him and Ostrander worked together for years on Grimjack. They were together right there at the end. My understanding is that they were going to do graphic novels together when the plan was to shift from ongoing series to miniseries before First Comics completely went bankrupt. So there's really no reason that I can see that why you wouldn't have had him do Star Wars stuff, except that maybe John didn't go into the Star Wars material until after Flint Henry was kind of a non-issue in the art world anymore.
Yeah, when they started Ostrander started writing, I think, the second year of the ongoing book, which was after The Phantom Menace came out, which was in 1999, because I think Timothy Truman was writing the book before Ostrander did.
Right, which is another connection, because probably Truman was one of the reasons why Ostrander was brought in.
Yeah.
So this was definitely a blast of a story, and really happy to end on this one. It was a lot of fun. For me, my page that I picked was page 5, which is an entirely silent sequence where they're dropping off the pig. We're seeing the pig look up with a sad little babe face, like, "You're leaving me," and then on the run trying to avoid an alien. And, it's hard to not pick a page that has more of an alien than the tail, but that pig is just so adorable that I think that's the one I would want to look at on my wall. But like I said, there isn't a bad page. I'd take any of these pages easily.
I like that page too, and I was trying to find a good page with the pig, but the page, oh gosh, I can't. It's the page where it's the two guys it's towards the end, the two guys with their exosuits when they're frying the aliens. Mm-hmm. If I wonder if that would look better in black and white, because the color is kind of washing out everything. I wonder if there would be more detail if that was in black and white. But actually, I think 2 or 3 pages before that, the splash page of just the ship. I really like that ship in orbit as like it looks like their pod is coming down, like separating from the mothership. Maybe I think that one actually.
Yeah, I would happily pay good money for any of these pages. They're all good pages. Yeah. But if you happen to get one with a particular element that you'd like, the only thing I feel bad about getting one without any lettering on it is I really like the lettering on this book too. They were exaggerated the same way the figures were, and so they were complement each other well.
Right in the middle of here, there is a advertisement for the Dark Horse Ghost book by Adam Hughes. She's got some big breasts.
Yeah. When I was doing my research on sales and the rankings for the Dark Horse books and stuff, I really didn't appreciate how big of a book Ghost was. It really rode that bad girl wave, and especially the issues drawn by Adam Hughes. Those were big time bestsellers for Dark Horse in the time those were coming out. And that is pretty much the last time Adam Hughes did anything on any kind of regular basis, right?
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know he has really devoted fans. He has those guys who will buy books just because he does the cover of it. He's one of those guys like a J. Scott Campbell or Dave Stevens where they're just there for whatever he's got to put out. And he was supposed to do All-Star Wonder Woman at one point in time, but it's just, I don't think he's come up with any kind of narratives. He did one of the Before Watchmen books, if I recall correctly, but between Ghost and that, there really wasn't a lot. It's mostly just covers from what I recall in pinups.
if people just if laziness is kind of a natural default state, if you can make a living just doing that, then sometimes that's enough.
It is amazing that we got as many Justice League International issues and even Ghost issues as we did before that started to happen. Where he took the Michael Golden, Mike Zeck route, where it's like, fuck it, I'm doing covers and now the only covers, and you're gonna pay me very well for them.
Right. So
I think that's the one. Unless you got something else you can think of to add to it. I think we did pretty good with it, though.
Yeah, no, that's a fun story.
As I've been mentioning a lot lately, is we're getting into all the crossovers. And were there any of those crossovers you had any interest in? Because I know you told me you didn't have the one where it's an alien Batman with Bernie Wrightson artwork, but also I'm not sure if you're a Bernie Wrightson fan by that point. Like, I love Bernie Wrightson's classic stuff, but by the time you get into the 90s, he's just... I still feel like Frankenstein broke him. I think he did Frankenstein and he just was never the same after he completed that project.
Yeah.
So are any of those crossovers anything of interest to you? Aliens Superman, Aliens Predator, any of that shit?
Not really.
Yeah. That's part of why I was going to go ahead and talk about. So what I might do, if there's nothing coming up, let me see. Oh, no, wait, I've still got some stuff from you. You've got Kidnapped. Did you still want to do Kidnapped?
Do I have Kidnapped? Let me look. Hang on. Glass Corridor, Stalker, Wraith. Which one is Kidnapped?
It's a 3-issue miniseries. I'd have to check to see who the creative team is. I'm just running through to see where I had you tagged for something. That was the last thing I had you tagged for was Kidnapped. Let me look it up right quick. 3 issues by Jim... Is that the Jim Woodring? Okay, Jim Woodring wrote it. Drawn by Francisco Solano Lopez. One of the covers is a chest burster on a guy's face. Not very striking to my mind, though, the covers. One's got a chest burster actually ripping out of a body. One's just got an alien terrorizing people. I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's a particularly compelling story here. I mean, I've heard good things about Jim Woodring's writing on aliens. I think I've read one thing that he did previously, but I don't know what would be special about this particular... Oh, it's Killian Plunkett who was doing the covers. He was the same guy who did the Labyrinth.
Oh, he did Labyrinth, yeah. I don't think I've read this.
Okay.
That doesn't look familiar to me.
No worries. I'll take your name off of it then. I think that was like you were telling me what you had, and so I plugged you in on the ones that you said you had that might be of interest. If you don't want to read that, don't worry about it.
I don't think I do have that.
No
so
worries.
I might have been mistaken.
No worries. So I'll take that off. So that being the case, let's progress real quick to the Prometheus and Aliens Covenant. Did you watch any of that stuff? Do you care about any of that?
Oh man. I remember at the time thinking that the trailer or the teaser for Prometheus was just one of the most exciting things I'd ever seen. Even distantly in my head, I was like, the movie can't be as good as this trailer. I was like, this thing just looks incredible. And I was so excited for it. And then me and my buddy, we had to travel a long way to see it, like a midnight show. And then like the day that it came out, and then we had like an hour, like a 90-minute drive to get home after the movie. And we were probably silent for the first 45 minutes. And then the next 45 minutes, it was just questions. Very kind of angry and like mean questions, because we did not have a good experience. I did not like the movie. I don't remember that much now. I've forgotten so much about it. I just remember thinking, like, why did this happen? Why was that? Like, this doesn't make sense. Why would he act that way? Why did she make that decision? Like, what was going on? What the hell was this whole thing about? Like, why? Like, why was this? Why did we think this was an Aliens movie? Why was this an Aliens movie? Were we tricked? Did he lie to us? Did he want to make an Aliens movie but forgot what it was like? Like, we had so many things. And then I did see Alien Covenant and didn't really want to, but just out of curiosity, I eventually saw it, and I felt like it was him doing a remix of both Alien and Aliens, and just like not a very creative or thoughtful one. It was like everything, like all of the high-minded ideas that he might have had with Prometheus that didn't translate. He's just like, okay, well, my audience is idiots, so I'm just going to give them a bullshit action movie that's if that's all they want. And it was just like dumb. I didn't like either of those movies. Yeah, for very different reasons.
I still haven't gotten around to watching Watchmen, but everybody has told me it's genius and masterpiece and everything else. So, people really seem to love The Leftovers too. So I'm glad Damon Lindelof had his redemption arc. But yeah, man, people really freaking hate Prometheus. And I think Red Letter, which were the guys who did that Phantom Menace, infamously the first like extremely long second by second dissection of a movie. I think they did something for Prometheus where it was exactly that. It was one of those Mr. Plunkett's, why did this and why did that? And it's a movie that very very easily encourages armchair quarterbacking, Monday morning quarterbacking. It's one of those movies where, and I've heard people defend it. There are things about it I like. I'm still trying to be cagey about it because if I'm going to talk about it, I want to talk about it closer to a time where they're actually doing adaptations and such. But it seems like a movie that the people who do defend it say that you have to watch all this, you have to do homework. You have to watch all the little short films and go into all this backstory and do all this supplemental reading, and then that makes it better than it was. And I didn't have as strong as a reaction as a lot of people did to it. I think there's a lot of things that are interesting in that movie that I did like, but put it up against something like Alien or Aliens or even Alien 3, it does not come out looking very good at all. No, that's a movie where I have to grade it more on a Terror Beyond the Galaxy of Terror levels of critique on that one.
No, I was kind of agreeing. Like, I would have to watch it again to give you any more substantive evaluation.
And you don't want to.
I don't want to watch it again. But I think like my thought going away from it after an hour 45 minutes of questioning with my buddy was that like there should have been nothing to do with like the xenomorphs or anything like that. It should have just been a completely different like sci-fi kind of weirdly horror genre or whatever, with maybe just the hint of the ship at the end is the traveler ship that we find in Alien or something like that, but we never actually see them or anything with that, even that kind of gestational like chest burster or infiltrate type of thing like that. It's like, don't even do that. Just like have that ship be the only sort of connective tissue between them, and the audience's mind can kind of fill in the blanks. And I think maybe that was what Ridley Scott wanted to do, and Fox was like, no, if you were going to give you the budget to this, we want an Alien movie. And maybe he tried to serve both masters, his own creativity and the studio, and I don't know, kind of came up with this mess in between them. I don't know.
Yeah, Ridley Scott is capable of hacking. He's done incredible work. You look at something like Legend, and it's one of the most visually fantastic movies ever created. But the man can definitely hack some stuff out too. I mean, wasn't he the one who directed the Silence of the Lambs sequel, Hannibal? Yeah. That's nobody's comparing that favorably to Jonathan Demme. So the man can just knock something out for the paycheck for sure.
Again, Covenant or whatever that. Yeah, I think that was a whole different flavor of bad.
I'm sure Danny McBride just campaigned and they were like, sure, we'll go ahead and give you a role. But to have him in a movie and not do anything remotely funny just feels wrong. Like what are you doing? Why are you here? You're supposed to make me laugh. You should be our Bill Paxton for this movie, and you're giving me nothing, man. Right. What's the deal?
At least play to the actor's strengths, man.
Right. All right. I think we've tapped that one, man.
Between the Pages blog, Billet Spy Vinyl, Billy Hines, who added, and he was Kazar, but inked by Delperdang, his best inker. Adam did Wolverine and then Hulk, which guested Kazar in his first issues. Not Michael Lacey on BVP2. That would be Batman vs. Predator. Batman vs. Predator was my second Batman comic after the movie adaptation and is burned into my brain. CH, Capital Gain Income, Chris Dunford, Chris Lydon, Christine VTuber Artist, Chunky Apps, Derek WC of History of Comics on Film, Dirk Ashton, Ed Moore, Gigantopithecus, I Was Joe Is, Julie Raoul, who added, this is one I have never read, but I did read the first Batman vs. Predator comic by Gibbons and Andy Kubert. I really liked his art on X-Men as a kid. It is very angular. I seriously wish this was adapted into an animated movie in the Batman animated series, Bruce Timm style. Keith G. Baker, Lamar the Revenger, Lorenzo Slesak, Maxo, Mike Send Aliens to Me, No Pop, Nucky 777, Pavel L, Rihanna Mike, Richard Field, September Rains, Siskoid, Speaker of the House Kirk Spencer, Superbound, Talk Nerdy to Me, and Oofda. On Tumblr, Avatar 24224GT, like the gallery for Aliens Book 3, Earth War. Captain Vieira, 1992 US, liked Aliens Colonial Marines. Gays and Lesbian Galore liked Aliens Berserker. Jeffrey Brousseau liked The Predator vs. 2, Hunting the Heroes. Diva Critter liked Stronghold. Magnet Robot Biter liked Aliens Rogue and the Predator vs. Free Flop Shoe Wobbler liked Aliens vs. Predator. Portal Max liked Dark Horse Presents Aliens Predator vs. And Noise NX liked Aliens Labyrinth. On the blog, Steve wrote, High Rolled Spine, I'm really enjoying your podcast, but the music is very loud, so I can't always hear what is being said. Could you keep it quieter or not have any music in future? Cheers. Here's the thing, I edit a lot of podcasts. If I edit them all the exact same way, I'd get bored very quickly, especially if they were all just pure audio. Different shows I like to have different characters, and some of the shows like to be kind of rock and roll loud. This is definitely one of those. Also, the audio quality on this show varies wildly depending on who I'm talking to. I have a lot of different guests on the show, so there's much less consistency on this show than most any other one I do. And often it's not even their fault. It's issues I have with my own setup for internet connections. But also, I don't like to spend a ton of time with the editing on this show because I do it every month. When the audio is perfectly crystal clear, I can hear all the flaws and it drives me nuts, and I tend to spend a lot of time with the editing, where one of the things I like about the show is I'll drop a background music, score music into here, sometimes rather loud, and that'll cover up all the mouth noises and pops and things like that. Especially 30 some odd episodes in the run, I'm not going to change the format, but I do try to be conscious of making it audible. I will say that we belabor a lot of points. We mostly talk about 4-issue miniseries here, so there's a lot of repetition. So if you just keep listening to episodes, I assure you that any points you missed because of audio on one episode will get covered on another episode. And as you know with this show, if you listen to a number of episodes, I do change the approach. This episode, for instance, has no music at all. So, and also I spent way more time editing it than I would have liked, and could have spent more time if I hadn't run out the clock. So all I can say is please be patient with us when you can't hear. It's some element I want to replicate battle scenarios. I want it to be loud and raucous, and you don't always catch everything, but I think you can get the gist of it. And sometimes those scores blaring is what keeps me going. So I need it. Sorry, man.
This has been the Rolled Spine Podcast. All audio samples are believed covered under fair use laws. No copyright infringement is intended.
Coming in October, Dark Horse presents Aliens vs. Predator 2 with guest Colonel D.W. Crabb.